All right, everybody, we are just at 3 o'clock, so we are going to begin our program. I'd like to welcome you. It is my pleasure to welcome those who are returning to our virtual conference, African and Africanness, the Relevance of Living Traditions. I'm Pamela Weichman, your host and the Director of Education and Artist Services at Wheaton Arts. Our program is presented by PNC Arts Alive and the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. We thank them for their support. Through memberships, donations, and shopping at shop.wheatonarts.org, you too can show your support. Please consider exploring these options so we can continue to offer free programs like these. It is my pleasure to introduce our two moderators that we have for this program. Our first moderator is Dr. Iveta Pirgova. Iveta is the director of the Folklife and Cultural Studies Department at Wheaton Arts and Cultural Center in Millville, New Jersey. Dr. Pirgova graduated from the Sofia University in Sofia, Bulgaria, with a master's in literature and folklore, as well as cultural studies. She received her PhD in folklore and performance studies from the Institute of Folklore and Ethnology at the Bulgarian Academy of Science. In 2000, Dr. Pirgova became the director of Folklife and Cultural Studies at Wheaton Arts, overseeing the Down Jersey Folklife Center. There, she has worked with more than 65 different ethnic communities, curating over 30 major exhibitions, many festivals, performances, artist residencies, educator trainings, workshops, and classes. She also teaches regular courses in cultural anthropology and cultural diversity at Rowan College of South Jersey and is actively involved with professional organizations such as the American Folklore Society, the American Anthropological Association, and the International Organization of Folk Art. Thank you, Iveta, for joining us and for moderating our program.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you very much.
Our second moderator is Ira Bond. Ira is a performer, dancer, percussionist, educator, researcher, community activist, masquerade specialist, musician, and cultural enrichment specialist for 30 years. Ira's cultural, artistic, and educational mission is to utilize arts as a means to develop positive relationships and to reintroduce African cultural values to the African diaspora in our area. In his work as an educator, Ira emphasizes the development of a socialization process, a rite of passage, and the creativity associated with traditional arts that can transform people to a higher realization of their life's purpose. Ira earned his BA in communications with a minor in African American Studies from Mansfield University. He earned a Master's of Education in Multicultural Education from Eastern University in PA. His thesis was Teaching Content Through Arts. His interest in traditional cultures led him to Antioch University to earn an honorary certificate in Malian traditional apprenticeship in Malian arts and culture with concentrations in French, Bamana intensive, traditional Malian aesthetic, and a traditional apprenticeship with the National Ballet of Mali. Ira is a lead drummer for Messiah Dance Works of Philadelphia and the Afro-Cuban dance company Kulu Mele. Ira is also the founder and director of the Maladelphia Performing Arts Ensemble that serves to create a bridge between African immigrant and African American communities through traditional song, dance, music, and masquerade. African masquerade is Ira's specialty. Since he was initiated into its traditions in Mali and the Ivory Coast, Ira created over 20 traditional African masquerades. Those are masks and garments. Ira uses drums, masks, and ritual to teach both children and adults how to pay respects to the ancestors while reflecting on our own mortality and imprint on our world. Ira, it is a pleasure to have you here once again to moderate our program.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Pam. I always believe it's a good idea that people know how our work and interests are related to the program that we're offering today. Thank you very much for these beautiful introductions. But now it is my turn, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our first presenters. So our first presentation is co-authored by two people, Dr. Emmanuel Dufrasne Gonzalez and Professor Nelly Lebron Robles. and I would like to introduce them to you now. Born in Ponce, Puerto Rico, Emmanuel completed an MA in musical ethnomusicology from the University of California in Los Angeles and a PhD from the same university in music and ethnomusicology. Dufrasne Gonzalez is the founder of the music and dance ensemble Taller Conjunto para Cumbé, with whom he has traveled the Americas, Europe, and the Caribbean, presenting many plena and bomba, the music and dance from Afro Puerto Rico. Dufrasne Gonzalez retired from his post as full professor from the University of Puerto Rico in 2022. He is a published author. His 3 books and many publications in a variety of periodicals on topics related to Puerto Rican music have made him be regarded as one of the leading scholars on the subject. Dufrasne Gonzalez is a member of the board of the Centro de I'm sorry, I do not know Spanish, but Investigaciones Folclóricas de Puerto Rico, an advisor for the music division of the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, and a member of the Foro Latinoamericano de Educación Musical, Puerto Rico chapter. Welcome, Emmanuel. And please forgive my pronunciation of the Spanish words. I'm trying. Nelly. Born in Guyana, Puerto Rico, Nelly completed a BA in education majoring in music, special education from the University of Puerto Rico, and an MA in education of talented students from the same university. She is the main singer of the music and dance ensemble Taller Conjunto para Cumbé since 1981. Nelly also is responsible for the vocal arrangements of Para Cumbé and many other musical recordings dealing with Afro-Puerto Rican music. She is the first singer to perform Puerto Rican bomba music with the Puerto Rico Symphony Orchestra and to sing bomba music in the festival Casals. Lebron Robles is a retired professor from the Puerto Rico Conservatory of Music, where she was chair of the Department of Music Education and General Studies until 2024. She is also a published author of 2 books dealing with preschool music education and is currently working on her first book of musical stories for children. Lebron Robles is the producer of the radio program Ambos Adiós Cuentos y Canciones since 2006. This is the only radio show for children in Puerto Rico. Nelly is also a member of the board of the Puerto Rico chapter of Foro Latinoamericano de Educación Musical and a member of the music committee of the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña. Welcome, Nelly.
Hello.
So, Emmanuel, this is your floor.
Well, greetings, saludos, and I thank the Wheaton Arts for the invitation. And well, I titled my paper Some Notes on the Africanness of the Music of Puerto Rico. And the African presence in Puerto Rico or on the population of Puerto Rico has been occurring for quite a long time if you consider that many of our ancestors from the Iberian Peninsula were from the area of Seville, from Seville and around Seville, and Seville as well as Lisbon were the 2 Western European cities with greater African population. It is said that in the 15th and 16th century, the African presence in Seville was around 10% of the population. And I have seen treatises or codices of that population in Seville, and there was a great amount of Wolofs, of Angolan peoples, among others. And there was a population in the Iberian Peninsula, in Spain and in Portugal, of people that spoke the Spanish language or Portuguese, and they were called Ladinos. Ladino, which is derived from Latino, because they spoke a Neo-Latin or a Romance language. In this case, were either Spanish or Portuguese. Puerto Rico has many musical genres that have more or less African influence. Some maybe, if you hear them, you will say, well, that doesn't sound African at all, except for a certain energy, a certain dynamic, certain, we call sabor, mean flavor, that is very African, even though in melody or in rhythm or in form or in words may have nothing African except for that energy that these words are performed. If you ask any average Puerto Rican person about which are the African genre, musical genre in Puerto Rico, they would probably say bomba y plena. Like if they go together, like a name and a surname. But really, bomba is one genre and plena is another. Bomba is quite distinct from plena. They are different genres, but they share some traits, and often bomba songs are interpreted or performed as plenas. One example of a plena was composed by Flor Morales Ramos. He was born in 1915, died in 1990. He was known artistically as Ramito, and he recorded this work called Qué Bonita Bandera. And the first three verses will say, Qué bonita bandera, qué bonita bandera, qué bonita bandera. Es la bandera puertorriqueña. Oh, what a pretty, or what a beautiful flag, what a beautiful flag, what a pretty flag is the flag of Puerto Rico. The first verse is said once and then it is repeated twice. The fourth and last verse of this refrain, but this is just a refrain, completes the statement and is metrically longer than the other three verses. These characteristics are present in Angolan music. So let's listen to this, to a fragment of this example. So in that example, it could be heard, you could hear a scraper that is part of the ensemble. It's made of a hollow board, and we call it guiro. It can also be called guicharo. It could be called carracho, even though maybe the most common term for it will be guiro. And it is in sound very similar to the Econda people's scraper called boyeque that I include in these two illustrations. Econda people from Democratic Republic of Congo, and they call it boyeque. And the way it sounds is very similar to the guiro that we use in Puerto Rico. Now, there's this other example that is from Angola, and there they call it the canza. It's the same instrument. It's a notched cane, part of a stem of a cane plant. And has notches, and a stick is passed over the notches to produce a scraping effect. So we can listen to this example from Angola. There we could see this example of dicanza. It's similar, very similar to a scraper that is used in Colombia, and that is called guacharaca in Colombia. But in Puerto Rico, they are used, let's say, made out of elongated gourds, dried gourds, and with notches sawed into it, the skin of the gourd, and the sound of it is very similar to this instrument from Angola. Now, this work has another characteristic. If you listen to the refrain, comerán a fruta, comerán a fruta, comerán a fruta, comerán a fruta, comerán a fruta. It's very similar to melodies of plenas in Puerto Rico, but very similar. In fact, there is one plena of the 1930s that would say, matanga bum bum, matanga bum bum, matanga bum bum, canario en un baile de plena. Let's pay attention to this refrain, that even though what you are hearing here is music from Angola, the melody is very similar to plena melodies. And in fact, even the ensemble is similar to a plena ensemble. They use guitars, they use the accordion, which is part of the traditional sound of plena. But in plena, also some hand drums, frame drums are incorporated, and they have different sizes, and for that matter, they have different pitches. 2 or 3 can be used, sometimes even more, but they would have, let's say, 3 independent parts to play multi rhythms, multi parts to produce a percussive complex. Another instrument that can be used in plena and that we use in Paracumbe, our ensemble, founded in 1979, is this instrument. In the top picture, we have this Ghanaian ensemble using an instrument that one of the names used in Ghana among Akan-speaking or Twi-speaking people is prepensua. The man is sitting over the lamellophone in the middle of the picture, of the photograph, and the bottom picture is of a lamellophone that I have here in my home and that we use sometimes with Paracumbe. And this example was constructed in the town of Isabela in northwestern Puerto Rico. Sometimes they are rectangular, and this one has an arch shape. And it's an instrument very much associated with Africa and African diaspora. It is known in different countries of the Caribbean, sometimes called marimbola, like in Venezuela, Puerto Rico, Colombia. In Cuba, it is called marimbula. In Mexico, it is called marimbol. In Jamaica, it is called rumba box. And it has other names in other parts of America, Afro-America. And there's a film by Fred Astaire that has an orchestra directed by Edmundo Ros. And they start one of the pieces with a very large marimbola. It has to do with a trip that Fred Astaire, as a character in the film, did to Rio de Janeiro. And there the orchestra performed with a very large marimbola with many keys, much more than the examples you see in the photographs. So let's go to the next illustration. This is a vocal example of how the hand drums would sound.
Y ahora, ¿qué tal si ustedes y nosotros tocamos juntos una sabrosa plena? Verdad es que ustedes no tienen instrumentos, pero no importa, lo podemos hacer con la boca y hacemos una plena vocal. Y dice así.
So this what I have in my hand is one of those hand drums we call pandero. There are other colloquial names, sometimes not organologically correct names that are used in colloquially in Spanish, but the most correct name will be pandero. And this one is made out of metal. This hand drum may be 40 years old. Maybe, yes, it has at least 40 years right now. So let's go to another example. This example is a very old plena from maybe the early 30s, late 20s, from Ponce, Puerto Rico. And I learned it from my grandfather. And with Paracumbe, we performed it. We recorded it several years ago. So we have that fragment. So I have this word scraper here. Just for you to see it, this is a very good example of a word scraper with the thing that is used to scrape it. We call this in Spanish puya. Puya, or puya is what you usually call, or raspa, and the guido with all its notches. And this is a very, I would say, a thin calabash, an elongated calabash. Scientific name was Crescentia cuyete. And so these are used in the Antilles to make scrapers. So next example will be an example of bomba. Now, before I go into that, I will probably explain to you something that is characteristic of bomba. There are different traditions in the Caribbean area that are similar. The Garifuna have their garaun drums, they call it in Garifuna language, garaun, garaun primo, garaun segundo. And they are similar in functions to the bomba drums. One is a higher pitched one that is used to make improvisations, and the other one is a lower pitched drum that is used to perform a constant rhythm, and over both drums where you would hear voices doing responsorial chants, call and response chants. In some cases in Puerto Rico, in the bomba tradition, there will be two choruses that would alternate, producing antiphonal effect. And but there's also these drums, the bomba drums, are made out of empty barrels. Barrels, according to the regional tradition, there were several traditions of bomba all around the coastal area of the island, and depending on the tradition, larger or smaller barrels were used to make the drums. In southern Puerto Rico, and that's the tradition that we perform in Paracumbe, the drums will be made out of empty rum barrels, and the musicians would sit on the drums and play in that position as you see in the photograph. But these barrels are already containers that are made out of wood, and they are hollow. So the two lids will be taken off, and it would not be necessary to hollow out a segment of a tree trunk to make a drum. And like in that account about Punta Quinte, who was abducted by slave traders when he went to the forest to cut a trunk of a tree in order to make a drum for his brother. Well, that tradition of hollowing out a segment of a tree trunk is common among the Garifuna of Central America. They make their drums that way, hollowing out a tree trunk, as in Venezuela also. And I would not doubt that in other parts of Afro-America that occurs also. But in Puerto Rico, the empty drums that could have contained rum, codfish, or bacon were used, and sometimes even nails would have been used to make drums out of them. And it is interesting to state that among Anlo-Ewe people of Ghana, Togo, Benin, their drums, Achimevu, Sogo, Kidi, Kagangu, those drums are not made out of hollowed trunks like the drums of the Ashanti, for example. The drums of the Anlo-Ewe people are made out of staves, wooden staves, placed in position and maintained under pressure to make either a barrel-shaped drums or cigar-shaped ones with very large cigars. I'm not speaking of small drums. And so this way of using technology to make drums is used in, or has been used in Puerto Rico, but also has been used in Africa. Another bomba's affinity with African performance is the relation between the dancer and or dancers with the motifs beaten on the lead drum, rhythms that convert visible dance steps into audible drumming patterns. The lead drummer traces the dancer's steps and movements with ingenious outbursts of rhythm. Other simultaneous but constant drumming patterns constitute danceable and irresistible basis for improvisations of the dancers and the lead drummer. Dancers portray their stamina, coordination, and talents, while the lead drummer produces sounds that coincide with the dance steps. This phenomenon is also found in Africa and in Afro-America. So, that's here you see this example performed by Paracumbe. So this video was created for children. That's why you see those moments that children are portrayed doing games or doing some dances, or at least stimulated by their mother to do, and mother in one case, the grandmother and great grandmother, to do some movement. And that's why you see those children in that film. But I think that's a good example of what I am trying to explain, this relation between the dancers and the drummer, the higher pitched drum patterns, and how that musician of the higher pitched drum would try to trace or to convert what is visible into sound. And so this is another example of a live performance. Well, the other one was a live performance, but this one has no intervention of children, no portrayal of children. This was done in a performance in Loíza, Puerto Rico. In this example, recorded in Ghana, I think it's a very good example of what I am trying to explain that occurs in Bomba. And but this is done with African drums, very probably Akan drums or Ashanti drums in the Twi-speaking area of Ghana. And the child does some movements that are made into sound, converted into sound by the drummer. So let's listen to this one. I think it's a very good example. And this last photograph is of members of Paracumbe posing for a photograph with a cultural delegation that we met a long time ago on a great festival around 1993. They were from Kenya, and we had an opportunity to perform together. And it was, let's say, an unforgettable event. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. This was really, really interesting. And I think that many of us might have been surprised that some of the African influences didn't come directly from Africa, but by the way of Spain and Portugal. And because very honestly, in Spain and Portugal today, it is not very often to see or listen this kind of music or dance. Is it possible that it is better preserved in Puerto Rico than it is in Spain?
Oh, yes, that is no question to that. What happened with the Ladino population of Spain is that many of them got on ships. And according to law, in order for the men not to leave their family behind, if they left on ships to the Americas, they had to take with them their families. So then I will not state that all of them left to the Americas. Those that stayed behind assimilated genetically with the rest of the population, and they are not visible today, or not even, let's say, the phenotypically, or not even culturally today, because they were an extreme minority. They became, let's say, a smaller minority in Seville and elsewhere in Spain, and the traditions disappeared. There's another tradition that comes from Spain and has been maintained in Puerto Rico, at least until the 40s, the 1940s, what would be wake ceremonies for children. And that was, we would call them in Spanish language, velorios de angelitos, or wakes for little angels. And in Spain, this was a strong tradition, at least in southern Spain. And it disappeared there, but it was preserved in the Americas, and particularly in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Venezuela, and maybe elsewhere, and even in Chile, even as far away as Chile. So yes, you are correct. And today you will not see this influence, in this great African influence in Spain, because many of those African people that lived in Spain came to Puerto Rico and other parts of the Americas.
Yeah, let me engage you a little bit while she's trying to get her connection. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. I do West African drumming traditions coming from West Africa, Mali. We have an instrument called the carillon, which is very similar to the guido that you talked about, but it's made from metal. And so they scrape the metal. And I just see a lot of, I see also like the call and response and a lot of traditions, and the melodies of the call and response that you talked about. I thought was really interesting how there were some melodies, even though the words might have changed, but the melodies from, I think you mentioned like the early 1930s, or like your grandfather's melodies that you will remember hearing. I wonder if you've heard some of the same melodies in like Angola, Congo, or even Ghana, like in terms of maybe not the words, maybe the language changed, but have you had in your research heard of any similar melodies in some of those traditional spaces in Africa?
I've heard them, let's say, a few examples of very similar melodies in Angola. I'm not saying that that cannot occur elsewhere, but well, we have to deal with the musical examples that are available to us.
Yes.
And today, as you know, well, we have YouTube, and there are many things published in YouTube that 30, 40 years ago, they were not available at all. We had to, let's say, use records done by certain companies that would record ethnic musics. And today, there's a great deal of recordings. But I have found, even in very old traditional music of Angola, this characteristic that one verse is stated in song, it is repeated, even though the melody can change, but the poetic verse will be the same, and then repeated a second time. And then the fourth verse will be maybe sometimes longer and will finish the statement. That I have found even in very traditional music of Angola. There's another example that Nelly would use later in her presentation of another work sung in Kimbundo language. Because the one that we heard here with Bonga Cuenda in that example from Angola, he was singing in Portuguese. That is not very different from the Spanish language. They are two languages, but they are quite close in vocabulary, even though the pronunciation may change somewhat. And but if you hear songs with these melodies, these types of melodies in African languages, well, that is what you are asking about. Yes,
and
they
I also think it's interesting, like how it reflects on how the culture is organized in terms of respect for eldership. and listen. Like, so and you also talked a little bit about how the drums are organized with like accompaniment, and then you have solos, even in bomba and plena. When I see it in in West African djembe drumming, even the Akan or the Ashanti drumming that you showed examples to, how like you will have what we sometimes call a solo, but that solo is speaking, and like that. But even though the solo is important, the accompaniment, that support from the other instrumentalists, or the support from the other coro, the song, like how it's just connected. I think that's really indicative of how African culture connects with each other, and like we support each other. Like there's a call, there's a response, there's a connectivity, even in the way in which we produce sound and music. I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Yes, in fact, I think it's quite fascinating how there's these parts that are played on certain drums to maintain rhythms. Drums and other percussion instruments to maintain like the part that is danceable. And then there can be some solos over that, but really we call that solo because, well, they are speaking, really. They are speaking, even though that drum language, because we do not speak African languages in Puerto Rico, our language is Spanish. Right. And it is not an African language. But sometimes you can have some cases that, let's say, there have been singers, artists who have placed words over the sounds of a drum, and they do it in a comical way. Sometimes it has worked that way. There's one singer who is we call el sonero mayor, the greatest song singer, and his name was Ismael Rivera, and he has a one work that he states in Spanish while the drum is beating. He says something that goes very well with the rhythm of that drum, very well with it. So there is a let's say a memory, there is a persistence of memory of how the drum would be used to transmit language.
Right. And I love that, because I feel like drumming is a language, and a lot of times, maybe 10, 20 years ago, even now, you have circles of folk that, but I call it, and I don't take away from drum circle drumming, but just this idea of like, I play what I feel, and whatever that is, versus playing structures that actually have relevance and meaning, on whether it's, communicating ideas in Spanish or in traditional African languages. There are certain phrases and certain ways in which we play the drum that are meaningful to the dancers in the chorus. I mean, how do you talk about that?
Yeah, like completely musical meaning.
Yeah.
Completely distant from language meaning, just musical meaning and abstract meaning.
And that's very significant.
Yeah, music is also a language, so it's musical.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the way, because even when I've been to Puerto Rico and I went to a bomba, and I've heard the drums play phrases, like, and I might not be able to interpret the phrases, but there's certain phrases that initiate certain movements, and I can see the connectivity that happens between the drummer and the dancer, even though it's in a different context. It is very beautiful.
I think so, yes. But then you have to take into account recent developments in bomba tradition or in bomba performance that are somewhat different from older tradition. And that I suspect that what you are describing is that.
Emmanuel, there are two questions that came from the participants today, and I'm going to read them to you. The first one is from Marilyn. And Marilyn is a professor in anthropology and Africana studies, retired now. And she was, until very recently, the president of the American Folklore Society. And she says, I've seen guiros only about a foot long. Does the length affect the tone? or is it the size a matter of personal taste?
That is a good question. Yes, sometimes when there are string instruments that are performing, musicians of string instruments, they prefer a smaller one because it doesn't overwhelm the sound of the unamplified strings. Then when guidos use with drums, sometimes they would prefer a larger one because it can create greater intensity.
Right.
Or some people will say volume, but really sound doesn't have any volume. It's intensity. And so that's why these can be things of taste, and they can be also of
choice depending on the combination with other instruments.
Combination because of the context where they are using the instrument, the ensemble that they are using. Has to do with taste all the time, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And the other question is from Michael Esposito, and I believe you know very well who Michael is.
Sure.
I'm very grateful to Michael that he actually connected us to be able to do this conference together.
I'm grateful also.
So the question is, do we know about at what time period that it was clear that the bomba styles from Luisa and Ponce were different? And also, what distinguishes the bomba style of Mayagüez, like that of the late Felix Alduin, from the styles of Luisa and Ponce?
Well, that can be another exposition, another, let's say, complete lecture. But I can tell you in general cases, at least I can compare for you the bomba Mayagüez and the bomba of Ponce by people, elderly people of Ponce would say that they were similar in traditions. But yet, the drums were placed on the floor and the musician would sit on them in the Ponce area. In Mayagüez, they would be placed slightly tilted and played more in a similar fashion like a conga drum. And so that would be one difference. Another difference from Ponce and Southern Puerto Rico tradition from Mayagüez and Loíza is that in Mayagüez and Loíza, men and women sing. In Southern Puerto Rico, women only would sing bomba. In Loíza, there will be antiphonal singing, like two choruses would alternate in a, let's say, in a call and response fashion, but will be two choruses. 2, 3, 4 people on one side, and a greater amount of people will answer. And that would not be, let's say, part of the Ponce or Southern tradition or the Mayagüez tradition. And sometimes the songs, the dance, and the repertoire will have certain differences also. The ensemble would not be exactly the same in Loíza or in Ponce. For example, in Ponce, 2 sticks will be used to hit the wooden side of a drum to keep time as a matter of a timeline, a clave. While in Ponce, in Loíza and Santurce, 1 stick was used to beat the first and second beat in each measure. Pa, 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 pa. And the guiro was used in that tradition of Loíza. In Ponce, the guiro was not used. In Mayagüez, it wasn't used either. So there are several differences, other ones also.
Real quick, I noticed in our presentation in a lot of places there, sometimes, like for instance, last night, Andres talked about in Cuba where there's certain areas that they call more like the traditional or closer to the African tradition. Which one, or is there a place in Puerto Rico where like Luisa or Ponza would you feel like they're closer to the African tradition or is it kind of just a mix?
I think it's just a mix.
Okay.
I think it's a mix because we have African tradition, but it's all mixed up with Spanish tradition. And there can be also an Amerindian tradition, but it's difficult to pinpoint, to point out. And but that is another topic.
I see that.
Like for example, one thing that must have characterized Amerindian singing will be pentatonic works without the semitones, without half tones. but that you can find in the whole world. So it's difficult to say that that comes from Taino society, and it could have come from African society also. But then you hear in Puerto Rico that it's not very common to hear pentatonic melodies. It's not very common. So, there are some, like there's one plena that goes like this. La máquina patinaba cuando salió de San Juan. Bayamón, Bel Dorado, Vega Alta, Vega Baja, volvió a patinar. It's a pentatonic melody, but then it's accompanied with diatonic harmony.
Yeah, well, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're way behind the schedule.
Yes, I know, I understand.
It was so
Thank you for
interesting, but
I'm glad
maybe
you
we'll
liked it.
have some time to talk a bit longer at the end. But let's ask Nelly for her presentation now.
Sure.
And we'll talk later.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So we're just doing the change of places, and I am very happy for this invitation and the opportunity to share a little bit of some of the topics that Emmanuel was speaking, but especially the emphasis on voice. So what we will try to do as fast as possible is to speak a little bit about the African influence in vocal Afro-Puerto Rican music. As Professor Pirogba said at the beginning, I am a vocal major. That's what I have been studying all my life, and I am a singer for the past almost 40 years of my life. And so we know that voices can be very powerful, and that we might be able to identify certain elements of West African song in Puerto Rican music. So just to make sure that we know what region we're speaking about. So West African countries, although the United Nations has only 16 countries that are identified as such, in Puerto Rico, we also take into account other countries where peoples were brought as part of the slave trade that are not necessarily a part of the official West African coast. So we have a few, we have them all here, and we just wanted to make sure that we knew when we were speaking of other countries that might not be considered West African, why we do that. When we speak about voice and vocal music, the three main characteristics that we might be able to identify that we share in common, although time has passed so much, are the form, the melody, and the sound. When we speak about form, Emmanuel spoke a little bit about that when he was saying, for example, in Plena, that there was a refrain where you had the same stanza repeated 3 times, and then you had a fourth sentence or a verse that was different from the first 3. So that is part of what we call form. It is also in the song in general, where you can have in call and response, so you have a chorus and a verse, a chorus and a verse. And many times in bomba especially, you have a chorus that is always the same, but the verse will be improvised by the singer, and his or her improvisation will be determined by the content of the coro. Or if he or she knows how or why that song was composed, so they could use those elements to enrich the way they improvise when they do the copla or the improvisation part. The melody, also Emmanuel spoke a little bit about pentatonic melodies, which are not that common in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, as many African countries, is a very rhythmic traditional music. We have very rhythmic traditional music, and it's interesting because as a preschool teacher or researcher in preschool music education, sometimes we hear that the way children should learn songs in order to have a good musical education is just using songs that are 2x4 that do not have rhythms that are too complicated, that are used only by half notes and quarter notes or eighth notes. But in the Puerto Rican tradition, our children sing the traditional songs, and they are very complicated rhythmically. So the melody is the combination of the musical notes in a coherent and pleasant way. And pleasant is a very subjective use of the word, because what might be pleasant for me not necessarily is pleasant for another person who is participating of the musical experience. But basically, when we speak about melody, of course, we have to take into account the silence, because silence is where we usually where we breathe, but also coincides with the natural pauses of speech and language. And then the sound, which is the particular way in which instruments and voices are combined in order to give it its particular identity. When Emmanuel was speaking about music from Angola, music from Senegal, music from the Ashanti people, we can identify where they come from or where they originated because of the way the notes are combined and the way the voices are used to convey the melody, to convey the essence of the song, and also when and how the instruments are used. If we want the instrument to be like the main characteristic of the song, so the instruments will be used in a certain way. But if we want the voice to be the main character of the song, so then the instruments will be just to help the voice to sound better. And that helps us to identify the genre, the country, and even the style of the song. And so I will just go into a few samples of what we have and compare what we have been able to research from the African countries and nations, and how you can hear that. You can still hear that here in Puerto Rican music. For example, this first piece we will hear, this first fragment, is from traditional music from Benin, and it's in a call and response form. Let's just hear a little bit. Now here we were able to perceive the call and response form. There were two distinct different choruses, and one was the soloist was doing the stanza, and then the chorus would respond, and then they changed the chorus at halfway through the song. But then the instruments that are used were there just to emphasize and enhance the voice. It was usually in Puerto Rico, when we have a bomba singers, we do that with the maraca. Okay, this is my maraca, and it's a very beautiful artisan piece made by Barbara Rodriguez. And when we sing, we use the maraca to keep time, to emphasize the tempo, and also to indicate to the drummers and the rest of the ensemble what rhythm will be performed. If it's a 2x4 rhythm, for example, but if it's a 12x8 rhythm, like Lero, and the maraca and singer will use their maraca in their dominant hand. So I'm a lefty, so this is why I use it in my left hand. And then we heard this example from Benin, and I would just like to share a piece of a similar form of the song Bambulae Se Allá. And bambula is a word that comes from originally from some type of African language, but we have lost in time the exact meaning. Now, the word bambula is present in many other countries of Latin America and Caribbean, and it usually is related to dance. Sometimes when you hear the word bambula, it is the name of a dance, or the name of a drum, or the rhythm, or the name of a song. So here, Bambulae Se Allá, it just means that, please, I hope that Bambula will continue to be.
Bambulae se allá, contigo no más. Bambulae se allá, contigo no más. Se allá o se acá, contigo no más. Bambulae se allá, conmigo no más. Bambulae, bambulea, contigo no más. Ay se allá, o se acá, ay se allá.
So the singer is doing improvisation, and you can distinctly hear the guido that Emmanuel was speaking about in his presentation, because this is an old song from Loíza. So when we did the recording, we used the older way of the ancestral way of performing and interpreting the song. Now, the other type of form that is more available in Puerto Rico, in bomba, and especially in Loíza tradition, is the antiphonal, where you have two choruses. And the singing group will divide itself in two, and then one group will always sing the same, and the other group will always sing the same coro, different from the first one. So let's say Guayamero, which is from, although Guayama is in the southern coast of the island, this song is from the northern coast in Loíza. So the first coro would be, Guayamero, yo soy de Guayama. And the second coro would be, soy de Guayama. So the first group would always sing, Guayamero, yo soy de Guayama. And then the second group will always respond, soy de Guayama. Sometimes they can use a variation and do, soy de Guayama. But it's basically the same two choruses which are responding one to the other. That's why it's antiphonal, because there is not improvisation by a solo singer. Okay, so that would go basically like this. Guayamero, yo soy de Guayama, soy de Guayama. Guayamero, yo soy de Guayama, soy de Guayama. So basically, that would be, excuse me, two groups of people singing. Guayamero, yo soy de Guayama. And then the second group, soy de Guayama. And then we have the sound, the combination of voices and instruments in their different registers that conform a particular sound associated with a country, a style, or historic period. For example, we have in Puerto Rico, usually when we have drum music like bomba or plena, the higher pitched drums, either in plena where the hand drums are pitched differently. So usually the higher pitched voice of the drum is the one that's used to improvise. So if it's a dancer or a plena player, plena performer who is improvising in the smaller or the higher pitched pandero, so what they do is, that is the improvisation sound, the high pitched. But in other African traditions that have been maintained in the Americas, it's the lower voiced drum that is used to improvise or to share that conversation between the drummer and the dancer. So for example, in Boca, it's the lower voices of the drum that are used to improvise. And in Puerto Rico, in bomba, it's the higher one, okay? So the way that the drums are used are very similar. One drum will maintain the rhythm and the other drum will improvise. Which one of the two, the higher voiced or the lower voiced drum, will depend on what country the tradition came from and how it was maintained when it came to the Americas, and especially in Puerto Rico. So I would like to share a small piece of this presentation. This is a group of Ghana women from Ghanaian traditional music, and these female singers accompany themselves with an instrument. Usually, the main or principal singer will use the instrument that is used to keep time. It could be a clave, it could be a scraper, it could be a maraca, it could be a two sticks, but usually he or she will help the rest of the ensemble keep the same tempo and establish from the beginning the tempo. So here, all the women are playing different instruments, but you will see that when the singer, the main singer, she will have one instrument that will help the rest of the ensemble keep together. This particular song is a call and response tona music from the Ghana project. It was recorded in 2013. And what they are singing is for a very special person who died in their village. So this is a mortuary song. Although we don't understand the words, we know that this is a type of ceremony that is used especially for very important people who have passed in their villages. It's a very short example, but if you noticed, the female main singer, she had the clave and she would repeat the same rhythmic pattern, ta 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 ta, and that would help the rest of the ensemble to keep together and to keep in time. Another thing that we like to use and emphasize is that usually singers in Puerto Rican, Afro-Puerto Rican tradition also accompany themselves with an instrument. In bomba, usually it's a maraca. In plena, it could be the either the hand drums that Emmanuel gave demonstrated a moment ago, or the guiro. Usually, if it's the singer who has an instrument, it would be an instrument that does not change. The rhythmic pattern does not change because it's easier to sing and perform with an instrument that does not change the way it is performed. For example, this is one of the lower voice panderos that is used in plena. And if I were going to sing a plena and use an instrument, this would be one of my preferences, okay? So this would do the basic rhythmic pattern that is used in the plena. Antonia le dice a Carlos, Carlos, ¿para dónde vas? Te doy almuerzo y comida y una peseta para manejar. So that would be, I would start with the coro or the refrain, and then the rest of the group would answer, and then I would start to improvise. This particularly Antonio and Carlos, you heard a little bit of that in Emmanuel's presentation. If I want a faster plena, so I would start playing faster on my drum. Sueño, 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 como tú te llamas. Yo me llamo sueño de la madrugada. Yo me llamo sueño de la madrugada. Either that or use el guiro. Okay? So the guiro is also a very popular instrument in plena for the singers to accompany themselves because they also have the control over the tempo and the timeline. Here we have a photo of what we do in the in Paracumbe. This is Renalí Santiago. She's the other lead singer in Paracumbe. And sometimes, well, in bomba, the maraca always begins so that the rest of the ensemble can understand what is going to be sung, which is the refrain they have to repeat. And in this particular excerpt of the song, Guayna Bomitambo, this is a song that was recorded by J. Alden Mason when he came to Puerto Rico at the beginning of the 20th century, between 1915, 1917. He came to Puerto Rico as a researcher. He was an anthropologist. And so he went to Loíza and he did field recordings on wax cylinders. So the originals are kept in the University of Indiana's music department library in Bloomington. And so those they were preserved there for many, many years. And about 30 years ago, they were discovered, 30, 40 years ago, they were discovered by one of our students who went over there to do his master's degree. His name was Luis Manuel Alvarez. So he went to Bloomington to do his master's degree, and he discovered these different types of recordings that were done in Loíza and in another town in Utuado, which is a mountain town here in the island. And Alden Mason, what he did was he recorded all types of songs. And among the songs that he recorded, there were many bombas that had been lost in time because the people who would sing them had already passed. So when we got a hold of these songs, we re-recorded many of them. And this is the latest way we've recorded Guaynabo Mi Tambo, just a little piece so that you can hear.
Guaynabo mi tambo, le 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 la la. Guaynabo mi tambo, que mañana voy pa' Cuba. Guaynabo mi tambo, le 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 la la. Guaynabo mi tambo, ay, arroz con caracolito. Guaynabo mi tambo, que mañana voy pa' Cuba. Guaynabo mi tambo.
So in this very small piece, it's a very new, we just finished recording this a few months ago. You could hear the lead singer, and she starts doing the refrain or the coro. And then the female voices, because although this is from Loíza, it is recorded in this Southern style where only the females sing. Okay, Emmanuel spoke a little bit about that. That's a very distinct characteristic of bomba from the southern coast of the island. So I made the vocal arrangements, and even though it's a 20th century, beginning of the 20th century recorded song, because we know it was, of course, these were adults that were recorded, and so they knew those songs from their childhood. So they could be traced back to the 19th century. And so although these are very, very old songs, what we have tried to do is to modernize them in the way we do the vocal arrangements. We do a lot of use of dissonance, and we try to organize the voices where they're not in thirds, but there's a fourth under, but which the fifth grade of the melody would be thought to when we hear European style harmonies. It's usually 1, 3, 5, where 1 would be the basic melody, the third over that, and then the fifth over the third over the first grade of the song. But then what we do is we change the order, and what we usually hear in European style singing in harmonies would be converted into a fourth under the main melody. So that is very characteristic also of traditional ways of singing in different African nations, where they don't go to music school necessarily, but they traditionally sing in harmony. Little children when they play, or women when they sing, and they're doing their everyday, every life things and work and etc. So singing in harmony in Africa in different nations is very common. And in our group, so we try to capture that again, because bomba traditionally is sung in unison, not in voices. So singing in voices is a more contribution of what we have done to bomba singing to help also to make it sound more like the ancestral sounds of our motherland. The style, as I said when I was beginning, includes the rhythms and instruments that travel from one country to another and can maintain sounds that can be identified as similar and connect through distance and historical passing of time. So although we cannot say these people brought this from so and so part of Africa to Puerto Rico. When we hear the songs, we say, that sounds like what we have today or what we had in the past. And when we hear the original, that it comes from, for example, the style we'll hear now from Angola. And then we say, oh, maybe this has to have come sometime, somewhere in time, something from Angola came to Puerto Rico and was transformed into Puerto Rican music, because the passing of time and of course, and distance, and then merging with what was available in the island in other musical traditions, transforms it into something that is totally different from the place of origin. Okay, so let's hear Lily Chiumba in her performance of Women of Angola. This recording was done by Folklife Recording in 2004. And this is from the 1970s. Okay, although the recording is available since 2004 commercially, but it was done originally in 1970. Okay, so let's hear. And when we hear Lily Chiumba singing this, it reminds us of the sound of plena.
Kilumba ya mie, kilumba ya mie, kilumba ya mie Angola, kilumba ya mie, oh kilumba ya mie, kilumba ya mie, kilumba ya mie Angola, kilumba ya mie. Ibanzo muatu ya mie, ibanzo muatu ye, tutale kale nungo wese, oh. Ibanzo muatu ya mie, ibanzo muatu ye, tutale kale nungo wese, oh. Kilumba ya mie. Kilumba ya mie, kilumba ya mie Angola, kilumba ya mie, oh kilumba ya mie, kilumba ya mie, kilumba ya mie Angola, kilumba ya mie.
So in this song, we could hear the refrain, kilumba ya mie, sung 3 times, 3 repetitions, and then a 4th song. She is singing in Kimbunde, which is one of the many languages that are spoken in Africa and basically in Angola. And then the refrain is done in voices. It's not sung in unison. So she presents the refrain to the coro, and then the rest of the people will sing as a response to her improvisation. So that's very characteristic of this style of Angolan music, but it's also very characteristic of plena, as you heard Emmanuel speak of a few moments ago. And so another thing, of course, is the presence of the drums. In plena, which is the other counterpart of more African-influenced music in Puerto Rico, we have the hand drums that we demonstrated a few moments ago. And that is a basic part of the form and the sound of the song. And the rhythm, tum, tum, kin, tum, kin, tum, kin, tum, which is repeated throughout the song, is what makes it sound like a plena. We could hear it when Lily was singing. It was and so it had the same rhythmic pattern as what we are going to hear here in this song called Guañeco Pie, which was recorded in 2015 by Paracum. Okay, and you will also hear a solo of the instruments. Emmanuel demonstrated the vocal plena. So here we can hear all of the panderos, all of the hand drums, and the guiro, and the marimbola, all together to maintain that same way of that sound that is distinct to plena. And it is so distinct that wherever you hear it, in any part of the world, you can immediately identify it as a plena. Okay. Also, the words to this song, this is a composition by Emmanuel Dufras. And Guañeco Pie was my mama. That was her nickname when she was a kid. Her older brother would call her that to tease her. And so when she told us that she would be teased by her older brother calling her Guañeco, her name was Juanita. So Guañeco is like a deformation of Juanita. So, and pie is foot. So why he would call her Guañecopie, we don't know, but it would bother her very much. And so Emmanuel changed it into a very funny song, okay? So in this example, we heard a male voice. Usually men are more prominent singers of plenas than women. But here you could still hear the refrain and the improvisation. And this form of this refrain was A-B, which means that the first line and the third line would rhyme and the second would rhyme with the fourth. And you also heard the sound of the Puerto Rican cuatro. The cuatro is a small guitar-like instrument that is from Spanish origin, and it is used not to make harmony, but melodies. So Yvonne Torres, she's our cuatro player. So she would improvise a melody during that space of 16 bars. And then we went into 16 bars of drumming. And if you would hear closely, you could hear that the higher pitched instrument, the higher pitched pandero or hand drum was the one that was doing the improvisation, while the guiro and the other two hand drums would maintain the same rhythmic pattern. And then the marimbola, if you could hear it, has a sound like a bass. And so it also makes another rhythmic pattern. So there's 3 different rhythmic patterns and the improvisation of the quinto or the quinto plus the guiro. And this is polyrhythmic, and it is also very distinct in African music. And then we wanted to finish our presentation with something that all of you might be able to recognize, a very famous melody from Cameroon. The combinations of musical notes that identify a song as unique and whose characteristics appeal to the ear of many people across distance and time. One of the more contemporary examples is Sol Makossa by Manu Dibango, the Cameroonian musician and saxophonist. And in 1972, it's very interesting, he started singing this song, and it was a very, very small, close-knit community song. And then there was this radio DJ who heard them do this recording in a family gathering. And so he recorded that and put it in a small radio station. It was so popular, people started asking for the song. So he went and he got in touch with Manu Dibango, and they made a professional recording. So this has been recorded many, many times. It's a few years ago, there was even this controversy if who was the sole proprietor of Sol Makossa. And it was, of course, Manu Dibango. What I would like you to hear is the original song, and then we will go to our last example of the evening. Now, that is like what makes this so unique. Sol Makossa, Sol Makossa. And of course, the rhythmic pattern and the melody of the saxophone which although it's a melodic instrument and it's not of African origin, it's a European origin instrument, it still has a very African type of playing in the rhythm. So ta 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 ta. It almost sounds like a drum pattern that you might be able to play in any drum. And he does it in the saxophone. Now, a few years ago, we were contacted by Rie Akagi. Rie Akagi is the first flautist of the Japan Symphony Orchestra. And when she is not playing orchestral music with her ensemble in Japan and many other countries of Europe and the East, she loves to play jazz. And so somehow she got in touch with a Puerto Rican musician, a very known, renowned trumpet player, Luis Perico Ortiz, who is also a very prolific music producer. And she said that she had heard our drum music, the music from Paracumbe, in Japan, and she would like to record something with us. So we were very honored, and we made this happen. And the song that was recorded was Sol Makosa. But not only did we do the medley of Sol Makosa, we also incorporated a song from our bomba tradition, Mamá Cuídame a Belén, which is kind of like a very iconic song from Paracumbe, where the melody was composed by Emmanuel Dufrasque. And the words of the refrain are part of a literature, a novel that was written in 1935 by Enrique Laguerre. So in that book, he describes two of the characters are walking and they're on their way to a bomba dance. And they start hearing the refrain on the way when they get closer and closer. So that's recorded in the book, but of course, no melody and nothing else. So Emmanuel took the song, the words, and he made them into a coro. But the way we put them together sounds very ancestral. So I would just like to finish my presentation with a piece of this wonderful song, Medley Sol Makosa Mamá Cuídame a Belén. I made the vocal arrangements for both songs. And so that you can hear a little bit of Sol Makosa sung Paracumbe style, Rie Akagi doing her flute solo, and then going into Mamá Cuídame a Belén. So just to point it out, we had the same rhythmic patterns in the drums when we were doing Sol Makosa, and the same harmonies in the Sol Makosa refrain as we had in the bomba part of Mamá Cuídame a Belén. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you very much to WheatonArts.
Thank you, Nelly. This was such a fabulous presentation, and
thank you.
I was really delighted. Actually, both your presentations were very educational as well for those of us who are not so familiar with these musical genres. So this was really great, and I was also happy to hear this example about the recording on cylinders at Indiana. I mean, Indiana University is one of the last universities in the US still offering PhD programs for folklore studies, and I'm really happy the archive was useful, and this was reintroduced into the Puerto Rican musical tradition, which is fabulous. So at this time, Nelly, we don't have questions from the participants. They might think of some later on. So I would suggest that we invite Mafalda to do her presentation, and we'll reconvene for the closing discussion together.
All right, Mafalda Thomas Bouzi, a grassroots artist, Moko Jumbe Stillwalker, and cultural ambassador of dance with over 30 years of experience as a teaching artist. Mafalda has engaged in intensive African traditional and Caribbean folk drum and dance study and culture exchange projects both nationally and internationally, including Senegal and Mali, West Africa, Bahia, Brazil, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Martin, Antigua, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and recently the Bahamas. She taught diaspora rhythms and dance courses at Villanova University, facilitated workshops, and toured as a professor of dance in France and England. Having studied under masters of their craft, Mafalda prides herself in being a griot and storyteller and continues the efforts of cultural preservation. She received a grant award from the Pennsylvania Council of the Arts for Cultural Preservation. I am currently exploring opportunities with educational institutions that will allow me to share my unique experiences and build solid relationships with those I serve, and ultimately deepen my passion for cultural preservation through dance. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Baba Ira. Thank you all so much. I'm Sister Mafalda. It is a pleasure to be here this evening and to connect with you all. Greetings to all my colleagues, brothers and sisters, informed and uninformed listeners, practitioners, and all friends. Thank you so much for joining. This segment is about masquerades. Our masquerades are nexus, our connections, the connections in Eastern Caribbean and African American experience. Masquerades as expressions of identity and forms of preserving cultural heritage. Masquerades as new forms of syncretic cultures combining both African elements and those of colonizers, yet different for each Caribbean island, and you will see some footage following. Masquerades as visualization of unique aesthetics of artistry. Masquerades as a reflection of West African belief systems, sacred connections to spirits of man, both male and female, young and old, connections to nature, earth, sky, waters, ancestral spirits, those living and those that have lived before. Through rituals, actions, dance, and drumming, you'll see examples from the Eastern Caribbean, including St. Kitts, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua, Bermuda, Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York, what we call as our tri-state area. You will see footage and clips from Universal Kulumele, Malidelphia, and Moko Jumbe locally, myself, Sister Mafalda. And you will see the comparisons of African American versus Caribbean masquerades. And let the slides begin. Thank you. This first slide that you're seeing is the Satembe mask of the Dogon people of Mali, which I was very blessed to visit, which is about 12 hours to give you a geographical location from Bamako. Traveled 12 hours across the deserts and across Sandy in Bandiagora, Mopti to Mali in the Dogon village. The Santembe mask, which I really wanted to highlight, in the Dogon people, it honors the primordial woman. The legend it has is she discovered the original mask. and which was later taken away from her by the men of her village. Since that time, the Dogon masking has exclusively been for males. And also, the secrets are hidden from women and children. And the identity of the maskers remain unknown to everyone except the initiators of the secret society. This clip that you see of the masked stilt walkers from the Dogon festival is an evening ending the Dhamma ceremony, where the Mokojum, these spirits, are guardians of their clan. They watch over the future generations, protecting the descendants and maintain the natural balance within the Dogon society, the Dhamma festival. Carnival. This next clip is the beauty of mass, short for masquerade, the carnival celebration, the beautiful costumes, which emerged in the 1800s as kind of a rebellion at first and defiant festival amongst the enslaved Afro-Trinidadian population. The masquerade were in ways dressed to mock the slave masters and aristocrats and characters. But now you see the beauty as today, as some of the other speakers, there's an evolution of these traditions from Africa, and that you see the beauty of Trinidad, the beads, the feathers, the headdresses, the string bikinis, and is indicative. And the carnival in Trinidad is compared to one of the biggest Brazil carnival. The two of them are one of the grandest displays of this beauty in the carnival in the world. Yes, the Moko Jumbi. Again, making mockery, of the colonizers. You can see the comparison. I don't know if we can zoom in a little bit, that you can actually see the mask in the Moko Jumbi. So this is, again, the tradition of the Moko Jumbi, the stilt walker, in comparison to the stilt walkers, the masked stilt walkers from Mali, is the guardianship, the keepers of the village, the keepers of the tradition. The Moko Jumbi sees over the trees, down the road. They're able to see danger, to warn the villagers. But in this context of the Moko Jumbi is one of the greatest resemblances of Africa in the carnival tradition, the masquerade. Barbados and the masquerade of Barbados, you can see the similarity in the African mask, the color, the brilliant colors, the feathers, the gombe. Last year, I had an opportunity to travel to Bermuda and take in some of the gombe masquerade, is what you see now on the screen. The beautiful mask highlighting the resemblance of Africa, the British, the Caribbean, and the Native American. You can see the tall headdresses with peacock feathers, the fringed aprons, the Gombe Festival. Traditions maintain today the cultural heritage from Africa and the Eastern Caribbean. Though Bermuda is not, but it's accepted as one of the Caribbean islands. Again, they parade down the streets, the Gombe Festival in Bermuda. Around in August, when I was there, is where you can see the Gombe Festival happening, the biggest thing in the country at this time, which is a reflection of Africa. Again, the life, the rich folk traditions. Antigua. Antigua is very unique. Antigua, for me, an island in which I was able to participate along with V. Underwood in the Out of the Drum Festival, along with not Los Bomberos de la Calle, but yes, from Loíza. They joined us in Antigua for an Out of the Drum Festival, which it was African drum and dance companies from throughout the islands, keeping the voice of the drum very inherent in its people. So you can see the Moko Jumbi, which celebrates the emancipation from slavery. Again, the Moko Jumbis in Antigua, the Madras fabric that is indicative of the island and their costuming. questions.
Thank you, Mama. Thank you. What an awesome display of the diversity of African masquerade and African culture throughout the Caribbean, coming through the African diaspora. We appreciate you being here. Um, I would first just say, you know, someone that's traveled to Mali as well and a couple of Caribbean countries, like really like again appreciate what you bring to the tri-state area in terms of masquerade and culture. What I was wondering, just a quick question, maybe you could talk about is on one of the slides. Uh, when I look at it, I'm reminded of Elegua. And there's in Trinidad, there's like they have different characters around masquerades. I mean, I know they have like
Yes.
clowns and cows and you know, bats and baby dolls and like different traditional, like they have the native and indigenous, but the job, you know, coming out of the tradition of like the devil, but not the devil in the sense that we know in terms of like Christianity and devil, but could you talk a little bit about like the job and how that comes out of this whole tradition in the Caribbean of Ilegua and what it means?
Well, thank you very much, Brother Ira, for adding those comments. And you being a master of masquerade, you also have knowledge that we all gain as being deep and entrenched into masquerade and the ties through from West Africa throughout the diaspora. When I trained in 2002 in Tobago, how to preserve this rich heritage of the Moko Jambi, for me as a dancer first, both folk and traditional, it was a revelation in which I learned it as a entertainer, dancer to bring joy, the Moko Jumbis in the streets. And at that time, I hadn't even, I had already traveled to the Dogon village and had already, you know, witnessed some of the masked hidden society of remnants in there, but I never knew that that was anything that I would be doing. You know, I never looked at learning to dance on sticks as a traditional chakaba or secret society, because again, in Africa, women, you know, it is hidden from them. Women do not do the masquerade and on stilts or off of stilts. But yet the connections are made in the mask, excuse me, in the mask, and then the dance, and then the garb. So the Elegwe is something that you may know more personally than I, because at the time of my study of the Moko Jambi, you know, it was not making the ties as a masquerade artist.
All right. And then we have Michael. He's asking an interesting question. Was there a tradition that you encountered that surprised you in some way?
Ooh. Hmm. Well, I guess my time in Mali and traveling 12 hours across the deserts of Mali, I guess from a dance perspective, all of the movements, the carrying, the tradition of carrying things on the head, the mushing of onions, the pounding, the dance, the movement, it all began to be a real revelation of the journey of Africans, and also in Gorée Island, in Senegal, West Africa, and being at La Porte Saint Etoile. That was something that was really the house of the slaves, an eye opener for me, being in the slave uh, 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 dungeons and seeing the history written and etched in the wall from those enslaved. And at La Porte Saint Etoile, the door of no return, how they were taken from the ship, from the dungeons onto the ship. In my stories, in my performances, you know, which I'll allude to as we go on through the clips, embodies the suffering, the joy of emancipation
Mhm.
in the still presentations. Thank you for that question,
Yeah, and
Mike.
then Mama, we had one more question in terms of your spiritual journey, as we think about your progression as and I wouldn't even just say a stilt walker, but as the spiritual, as a person, a keeper of this, a custodian of this culture, spiritually. Could you just talk a little bit about the connections that you have found and that you are now responsible for as being someone who, uh, has went to kind of like the root of some of these mass traditions and seen the diaspora of throughout our diaspora in terms of the Caribbean, just illuminate the spiritual connections that the Moko Jumbes, some of their responsibilities.
Wow. Uh, thank you, Baba Ira, for that question. And I'm getting goosebumps because it is a responsibility. It's we here in our communities in the United States, the roots of African masquerade has dwindled down and been watered down into New Orleans masquerade, uh, uh, parading, beautiful colors and things in the street. But as a Moko Jambi, as a keeper of the culture and in being involved with organizations like that, rooted here in Philadelphia, it is a platform. Cultural preservation and identity is really key. And as we have seen the importance of it with some of our other presenters, both yesterday and today, we here and the youth in our communities really need to see more and understand it's greater than a circus parade. It really is a connection to our ancestral heritage and history. And I feel that as a Moko Jambi and Stilt Walker and storyteller, I have to use that platform to speak the voice of the ancestors. And I've learned that along the way. And the mysteries of it, I keep I keep sacred in the sense of
Mm.
I know and I understand. Though again, I myself, was met with, I don't know if I would say criticisms, but questions as to because as a traditional and folk dancer, West African tradition, studied in Senegal and Mali with some of the National Ballet of Mali as well, being a stilt walker and then having this cross cultural tradition of the Moko Jambi. How am I able to put in context the presentations and what I do? Is understanding the roots, understanding how it is journeyed across the Atlantic and throughout the diaspora, and putting it in its proper context when I present or encounter other Mokojambis, Kachabas, stilt walkers, stilt dancers, and preservation artists.
Mm. Okay. Awesome. Beautiful.
Thank you. I think it's important that we take a moment of pause as we go into the last segment of the clips that you'll see. And as we go from the Eastern Caribbean over to these United States, I think it's important that we stop right here and I share something with you. The Negro Act of 1740 banned all Africanized dancing and drumming to prevent uprisings. And this was in the aftermath of the uh, Nat Turner revolt, slave revolt, and others that happened in the plantation era in the South. I personally was born in Georgia on a little farm in Warner Robins, Georgia, in the slaveholding South. And there were songs and stories that I learned, though we quickly, at a very young age, moved up to New York City to Spanish Harlem. But in the South, and having this ban, we had to adapt other ways of music. So we substituted with hand and body slaps, heels, the ham bone, ham bone, have you heard? Jock, 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 jock. Mama gonna buy you a mockingbird. And we began to clank the spoons, to make music with the washboard, and foot tapping, and toe stomping, the African slaves were forced to adapt the European forms of dances, and white colonial Americans that found their dances to be, inadequate, void of creativity. So the slaves had to infuse these dances with their own rhythms and steps and style. So this clip that you're looking at, the Universal Ensemble, from Camden, New Jersey, and the Universal African Dance Ensemble was founded in 1984 by Baba Robert and Wanda Dickerson, and he is now amongst our ancestors. So we definitely want to honor him and the traditions that throughout not just the tri-state area, but throughout the world, because they are viewed, they're based in Camden, and they are held as one of the largest African dance ensembles in the U.S. Okay, this is Molly Delphia. Molly Delphia, this is which is currently on display at the Wheaton Arts. And here's a little bit about the Bambara people of Mali and Molly Delphia, which is a folkloric performance art ensemble that serves to create a bridge between the African immigrant and the African American communities throughout traditional and contemporary songs, dance, music, and masquerade and folklore. It's comprised of African and African American professionals, artists, singers, dancers, and folklorists. And they're inspired by one of our own, that's moderator Ira Bond, and multiple experiences that he's had in Mali, West Africa. But yet, having grown up in Philadelphia, he was able to translate and preserve costumes or customs such as this in what you see now. Mali Delphia, Zuali, the womanhood of the Gairo people of Ivory Coast. Again, Mali Delphia, and the name refers to the connection between Malian and Philadelphian cultural arts such as jazz, blues, Afropop, hip hop, and traditional and contemporary percussion. Kulumele. Kulumele, a very, very popular African dance drum ensemble that was established in 1969 by, again, one who is now one of our ancestors, Baba Robert Crowder, whom I had the pleasure to work hand in hand with in Coatesville, Pennsylvania. Kulumele is the nation's longest enduring African dance company, who presents traditional dance and music of Africa and the African diaspora. C'est moi. It is me, Sister Mafalda. The clip on the left is a recent picture from a culture fest at the Wheaton Arts. Again, we thank you for honoring cultures and traditions from West Africa and South America, the Caribbean, and America. And it was a cultural festival, and you can see the costumes, the costume on the left, indicative of the Moko Jambi and the carnival tradition from Trinidad. And on the left, again, is a photo of a presentation involved at Wheaton Arts as they embrace the cultural diaspora from West Africa. And this particular costume was inspired again by the suffering and yet the emancipation that we have endured as African Americans. I just want to say that today my works reflect the story behind the costumes, the story behind the dances, stories using my works as a step forward in my ongoing growth towards a personal and unique approach to using my art practice to address social injustice issues affecting my community and the global community at large. Thank you very much. We now open up for questions, comments. Thank you very much.
Actually, there is one more question that is for you, Mafalda, before we ask questions of everyone who presented. That came from Coffee Doncor. You were not here last night, but Coffee is an artist, very, very talented person who works in both visual and performing arts. He was born and raised in Ghana. and his works are also on display together with the masks that you just talked about at WheatonArts. And his question is this: the colors and symbolism of masquerades should mean a lot in the Afro-Caribbean culture. Can you elaborate more on that and how drumming accompaniment connects us to the ancestral spirits?
Wow, thank you very much, Brother Kofi Danko from Sankofa Ensemble, and which again I've had the pleasure of working with personally and traveling to
So you know each
Mexico.
other. Good, good.
Yes, yes, and representing these traditions from Africa in the Fourth World Water Forum in Mexico City, Mexico. As far as the colors, uh, in the Eastern Caribbean and throughout the West Indies, the colors of the flags, the bandero, that was also saying in Que Bonito Bandero, what a beautiful flag. We know that the African, the Taino, the indigenous, and the Caribbean roots, so the Spanish and the colonizers, the flags are the representation of their country pride, their heritage, and locally. And here in America, we have our flag, we have our bandero, the red, the gold, and the green, and which you will see during our Kwanzaa festivals. And we need to know and have more of this pride instilled in our youth and in our communities. We have our bandero. It is beautiful. It is reflective of the colors, the red, the struggle, the green for our land, Mother Africa, and the black for the people. So each country has their flags and they wave them with pride. So we want to wave ours more. We have a story. Thank you, Brother Kofi.
Well, I would suggest that Nelly and Andres uh, um, open their cameras so that we can see each other. I know that we are behind schedule, but people seem to be interested in what we have to say in the closing discussion, so they are all still here. That is because you had this wonderful presentation, so it's really nice. And you can ask questions of each other. I will just ask one question for all of you, if you think you can elaborate a bit. We heard so much in every one of your presentations about the African cultural heritage as interpreted in the Americas. And I was just curious, is there any reverse influence? Is there something from the Americas that influenced back the African music and dance? If you
Yeah,
have.
there is. There is a, I remember an interview that was transmitted on the radio, let's say circa 1984 in Los Angeles when I was a student there. And in the interview was with Celia Cruz, the famous Cuban singer, and she was stating that she visited an African country, very probably Republic of Zaire, like it would be called in that time, or Democratic Republic of Congo. Maybe it was there, and she stated that when she arrived, that she got off the airplane, they received her with an iconic song of her repertoire, Caramelo, 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 aquí lo oye, caramelo, aquí lo caramelo. And then she said that sometimes they did not pronounce the words well, that they learned it phonetically as they could because they did not know Spanish. And then, well, this is an example of how the recording industry, the recording industry, and radio has influenced, let's say, Africa from Latin America, from the Caribbean area towards Africa. There are strong salsa traditions in Ivory Coast, Senegal, and also in the Congo area. I would not doubt that there is certain presence in other countries. Like there's one Spanish-speaking country in Africa. It is called República de Guinea Ecuatorial, or you would say in English, Republic of Equatorial Guinea. and they speak African languages also, of course, but the official language there is Spanish, and they hear lots of music from Latin America, a very good amount of Latin American music, and they can name the artists, and they can sing the lyrics by heart. And there is this a young Mexican man has gone there and has interviewed people on the streets, asking them questions about what is their knowledge of Latin America or the rest of the Spanish-speaking world, and they would say different things, interesting things, and also would comment about the Spanish language in their own country, how it is more common in the big cities, less common in rural areas, and so on. But Latin American music can be quite present there. Like in maybe in the 60s, there was a recording probably from Ivory Coast or Senegal.
Yes.
Of the peanut vendor, El Manicero.
Interesting. Yes. Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask Nelly, and are they familiar with Africando?
Oh, yes.
From Senegal. Yes, from Senegal. And they sing not only in Arabic, Spanish, and Wolof, but it's all of the music and instrumentation, the dance, salsa, and people cannot believe that this is an African group singing in Spanish, and they've had concheros go there, and so I love that. One of my favorite artists.
That was something that I wanted to mention also, the influence of dance, of salsa or tropical forms of dancing, which you can still see the influences of Africa in the movements, in the livelihood of the movements, and the way the body language, but then it transforms into something different here, and then it goes back. And it's very interesting, the reinterpretation of salsa in different African countries.
Right. What about bomba?
Can I also just mention bomba? I want to mention hip hop, and I'm glad you mentioned Father talking about the hand bone traditions and some of the African American traditions. And I think I think of Mali, and I don't know if people are familiar with the kora, the 21 string harp, and then you had Tumani Diabate, who just recently passed Major Jelly, or what we in French they call it griot, from Mali. His son Sidiki Diabate is also a kora player, because we know they keep it in the lineage, and he does a lot of hip hop in his music and influences rap. Of course, they're rapping in Bamana, but like you can see a lot of hip hop, especially in the younger generations throughout Mali and also West Africa, as you know, the dress. So it's very reciprocal in that manner.
Right. I'd like to chime in about that, as Kulumele, Malidelphia, and Universal, many of them, they're all trained in martial arts. You know, going back to the roots of martial arts in Brazilian capoeira, brought over by the Africans enslaved, as well as the African Zulu style of the stick fight and the dance is a wonderful, wonderful parallel to traditions.
We have in Puerto Rico, we have Coco Ballet, which is a stick type of combination of martial arts and stick dance, stick fighting, which can be traced to African roots, but as also there is a type of tradition of stick dancing that is that has been preserved, not by means of Africa, but also by our Spanish heritage. So it's very interesting, all these syncretisms that converge in the Caribbean, basically because of all the influences of the different populations that came here. And also we can see how there is a common Africanness in the region. We had a chance, a very wonderful chance to participate in this event in 1993 that was it took place in Mexico City, Mexico, called Primer Encuentro Continental de la Pluralidad. So this was a an event that was conveyed by the indigenous INI. The INI was the Instituto Nacional Indigenista, the National Indigenous Institute, and it was a response to the 500th anniversary of the colonization of Christopher Columbus, or the discovery of the Americas. And so what they did was they invited original ancestry or indigenous peoples from all the way from the north of Canada to Tierra del Fuego in Argentina. And it was very interesting because you could see all the indigenous people. And then when they got to the Caribbean, everything was blackish.
Wow.
No, it was powerful because everything was indigenous, and then black people were converged in the Caribbean, which included the Caribbean coast of South America and the West Indies, the Antilles, and Central America. And then when they went back into South America, so it went back to the ancestral and the indigenous people. And then we had a chance to perform all together. All of a sudden, there's this plaza in the middle of the city, el Palacio de la Minería. And so we got all together. Everybody took out their drums. We all had different types of clothing.
Yes.
We had the long skirts and the headdress and headpieces. But then everyone took out their drums. We started.
There you could see.
I still get goosebumps.
Goosebumps.
It was like getting together with a long lost cousin.
Yes, I have a question for Andres.
Andres actually indicated to me in the chat that he wanted to ask a question of Nelly.
Yeah, of course. ¿Cómo estás, Andrés?
Bien, bien. First of all, lo voy a decir en inglés, but I am so excited that I finally get to interact with Nelly Lebron. I've always been a huge fan. I was a former student of Dr. Emmanuel Dufrasne, who I am. I don't want to start with Mr. Dufrasne. I love him very much. I moved to Puerto Rico in 2002. I was one of his students. I made sure I became one of his students at some point. So I took a class called Danzón y Danzonete. But I've always followed his work. His radio program at the University of Puerto Rico has been very influential in my life. And also I've been, maestro, usted es una guía. And but this is a question for you both, since I've followed your work since I was a very young man at the University of Puerto Rico. One of the first CDs I ever got to study bomba was para one of the first productions. And so, and I understand in the years I've been studying bomba that it's an incredibly influential recording, and your research for decades has been very influential, both of you. So and I'm also aware of research. I'm as a Venezolano, I've been always drawn to bomba because due to some rhythmic similarities that I felt in my heart that I was able to decode and say, okay, there are some relationships we have here. Now, I've been aware of your work. Of course, there's a lot for me to research, but also the work of Lester Nurse, the work that Jerry Ferrao has done, other gentleman by the name of Jorge, oh my goodness, estoy olvidando su nombre ahora. But he did his doctors in also research about bomba in the Caribbean Institute in Viejo San Juan, en el estudio de
Maybe it's Jose Fernandez.
Yeah.
Entonces, lo que quiero, my question to you both is, has current research influenced your work? Is there a collaboration, you say, on a certain agreements, certain things that you've learned from others research about the vast studies that is Puerto Rican bomba, given that is it was very regionalized, very regionalistic. and now it's become more obviously with in modern times it's even though each rhythm and style has its endemic place in a specific part of the island. Nowadays it has changed, but regardless, there has been other research. What is your what are your thoughts on the current research? Is it something that you've agreed? Have you found agreements, disagreements, and where what are your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, we feel very proud of the work we've done with Bomba, and we say this with a lot of humbleness. Because when we started doing Bomba, there were very few people who were interested in Bomba as an important genre that was a part of our musical identity. As in many countries where there have been enslaved people, the traditions that come from our Black heritage are usually downplayed as being coming from ignorant people, from people who are poor, from people whose contributions were not important in the making of an identity, national identity. So seeing what is going on with Bomba, coming from, they would call us Aunt Jemima, they would in a very unrespectful way. They would sing Mama Inés, which was a song that's a Cuban song, which is associated with a Black woman who is not very fond. And so coming from that when we started in the 80s, and then seeing what's going on now, where Bomba is considered like the music that many young people identify as being their music, is very refreshing. On the way, there have been a lot of things that have been going on, some of them very good, others not that much. Many people are interested in doing research, so that is always good also. I had the honor of being the first teacher in the conservatory to teach a course on bomba as a musical form for musicians, not a historical base, not a folk or a traditional view, but doing the research and the analysis of musical form, because it is a music. So, and it was a very popular course. So we've come a long way, and I think it's good. You can hear bomba every day now in different parts of the country, and that is also good. But with that comes something that is not as good, which is the homogenization of the tradition, because bomba has very distinctive characteristics that come from different parts of the island. So when everybody does everything, they put everything together. Now there is this like universal form of bomba, which is not distinct one from the other. So although a lot of people are doing bomba, sometimes it's very boring to go to a bomba dance because it's the same thing over and over and over again. And we do this as a very constructive critique in a constructive way, because traditions evolve, and we are aware of that, but they should also be a place where you can say, I want to hear the roots, I want to see where this comes from, in order for me to innovate, to evolve, to give more, and to understand that have our musical, dance, and cultural traditions are what make us unique. And so para Cumbes, I think that our greatest contribution, Andres, has always tried to teach people how the ancestry of the genre, how it was in the past. We had the amazing experience of meeting and sitting and speaking with all these people who are dead, who have been long dead, and have them speak of their experiences as musicians in their younger ages. So we're kind of like the link between the past and the present.
Yeah,
That's wonderful. You see,
Yeah.
so
Could I ask a question? I wanted to ask if you all, if you know our beloved, who is also a member of the ancestors, Roberto Linares from Ponce. He, and maybe Andreas know him.
yeah.
Yes, he was my teacher in Bomba.
Okay.
He taught me the songs, the dances. He put on the afalda. He danced in the skirt, and he's been gone, I guess, almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
And I am in possession of the archival videos of his performances. He then was in Spanish Harlem and playing with the rumba and congueros there. And if you all will be interested, that's something that we could talk about. I was very, very close to Roberto here in Philadelphia, and his partner at the time, Jenny. And when he passed away, she moved, and I have boxes and boxes of archival video footage from Ponce, from him there, him in New York, New York, and here in Philadelphia. If you all be interested, I think he should go in the history books, not just in Puerto Rico, but around the world, of being one of the keepers of the culture of bomba. And he spoke the language, and he was free about it. Me being African American, and my son, Dominique Thomas, maybe Andreas know Dominique, my son. That is my son, who studied with me in Mali and Senegal. He went on to Berkeley and studied under Horacio Negro and some of the world-renowned congueros from Puerto Rico and Cuba. So it would be an honor to collaborate with the preservation of what he contributed. Also, I know William Cepeda very well from New York. He's in New York now.
He's my brother.
He played the conch shell. And
I have sung in some of his recordings. So, and he has been a major contribution.
Yeah, he has turned this into a classical instrument.
It has.
In the orchestra. And so, again, very, very wonderful. I look forward to collaborating with you all and talking again.
Of course.
I got to come to Puerto Rico soon.
It's very important, Mafalda, to point out that the diaspora has been a major influence. Puerto Rican diaspora is very unique. And many of us have had to leave our country for other circumstances. And then, but we also want to preserve our Puerto Ricanidad, our Boricuaness, when we leave. And so we have, right now, I have Ibelis Diaz, Bombera de Corazón. She's in Chicago. She's here in Puerto Rico.
Oh, she did something here in Philadelphia. So I was, okay. Oh, then I met her with Los Bomberos.
Yes, of course.
Tony and those. So
right.
They are my, yes, they are my
So,
colleagues. They are my brothers.
So, we have a very strong connection with many of the people of the diaspora, because for them, it's important to have that connection. And for us, it's important for them to feel that they are not less Puerto Rican because they don't live in our island.
On the island. Yes.
And then, being a Puerto Rican outside of Puerto Rico is very different of being a Puerto Rican in your country. And so that's also a very wonderful way of doing research, how it outflows. And I just wanted to say, Mafalda, and if next time you come to Puerto Rico, you have to go to Loíza and meet Raúl Ayoala. If you haven't met.
Of course. Well, Marcos is there. Marcos Penosa, that's my people.
Right, Marcos Peñalosa, yes, he's a very good friend. And but Raúl is one of the major mask constructors in Puerto Rico. And so we are friends for many years.
I think that's a very important question that you both raised, Mafalda and Nelly, keeping the connection between the diaspora in the United States. I mean, in New Jersey, we have so many people.
They have Segunda Quimbamba there also.
Exactly. And
I have to say,
living in Puerto Rico, I think we will have time to just a few concluding remarks. Let's do with your last question, and then we'll do some concluding remarks. It's we're about 30 minutes beyond our time.
This is wonderful. It's been great to be a part. It's been great to exchange with you all. And these connections is a manifestation of cultural preservation, with roots from Africa, and going around, and kids will say, I was privileged to perform on Baile Mi Baile con Don Francisco in 2006 in Miami, and we were on stage, and I won, mind you, with a dancer from Mexico, and the West African dance choreographed as a partner dance between two people. And that was, some more great, wonderful accomplishments and connections to the Latino community here in Philadelphia. Thank you.
We were there. We were in Philadelphia. We performed many years ago in Painted Bride.
Oh, yeah. On South
And we
Street.
did yes,
unfortunately it doesn't exist the way it used
yeah,
to,
I
the
know,
way when
yes,
you
it
came,
disappeared,
but
but we also did a tour among the schools, the public schools that were in the area. We
Residents,
had a
great. We'll have to
wonderful
have you
time.
back.
when you come back, Sister Mafalda and I will welcome you. I'm actually
course.
in Buffalo right now. I'm about to do a sound check. I'm gonna collaborate with a Puerto Rican organization called El Bate, and we're gonna play
Oh.
bomba tonight. We're gonna do some Latin jazz, but there's also a
Great.
bomba space because we're
Wonderful.
incorporating the El Bate, which is a bomba group from Buffalo, New York. So I'm
Okay.
excited to be
Buena
here
suerte. Buena
as a
suerte.
guest of como un huésped que Puerto Rico me dio una bienvenida que jamás olvido. I always hang on to Puerto Rico. I always say, yes, I'm from Venezuela. I live in the United States, but Puerto Rico is my second country.
Gracias, gracias.
Y tiene
Yes.
has to do with the music, with the bomba community specifically, that I threw myself head first and has always accepted me and always been generous. So I always, and first and foremost, thank my teachers in Puerto Rico, Dufrasne being one of them, one of my major influences. Los hermanos Emanueli, especially Vitito, Marcos Peñalosa, and then un sinnúmero de individuos que merecen también reconocimiento. Los Cepeda, obviamente, Jesús Cepeda, increíble. Pero bueno, I have to go to a sound check. Thank you so much.
Ciao,
I would say that,
Thank you, Andres.
Dr. Iveta, this has been an amazing learning experience. And I appreciate Brother Ira, mi hermano grande de Philadelphia. Thank you for having invited me to take part in this.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao, Andres.
Ira, do you have some concluding remarks to offer? Or shall we wrap up?
Yeah. Of course, I think one of the big things that I've noticed is, in all of our traditions, being able to maintain our Africanity, but also being able to articulate our own voice, whatever that is, as someone who plays a different instrument, but within the African context of the djembe, and thinking of, and like our sister LeBron talked about the generalization, like just making sure that we are true to our roots, but then at the same time, we're able to articulate who we are. I think that's a beautiful balance to be able to do, and everything that we do that is African, being true to our to the family structure of it, which means it's balanced in respect and reciprocity and love, in everything that we do, and the respect for our children and our elders, the respect for the creator, no matter what that is, and the forces of nature, the forces of our planet and humanity. I think that that's what African culture embodies, no matter who you are. And as long as we can be true to that, I think that our future generations have a bright future. So with that, thank all of you for a wonderful opportunity to build. I'm happy to be a part of this culture, this beautiful culture.
Thank you so much, Ira.
Yes, Baba Ira.
I'm very happy that, there's been such an illuminating 2 days. It's been very great to have all of you presenting. And if you look at the chat, you will see how many words of appreciation and gratitude people had to offer. And I'm offering the ones from WheatonArts and Cultural Center, and I hope we'll continue this discussion later on. Could be in a different format. We'll find ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Ciao. Thank you, Iveta. Thank you, WheatonArts. Thank you, Baba Ira. Ciao, Nelly.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure meeting you all.
And Andreas. Thank you. See you all in the circle of life. Ciao.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our presenters, our moderators, if you would like to follow any of our presenters, please use the links and the handles that are provided here on the screen. I also put some of them in the chat earlier. If you would like to receive that chat as an email, I can send that to you. So please feel free to reach out for that. My email is here on the screen, and I welcome everybody to continue to participate and join us for these virtual presentations. They will be posted on the Wheaton Arts website, which is listed here at wheatonarts.org. Thank you all again, and I wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Pamela, for all of your work.
You're
Thank
very
you.
welcome.
Ciao, ciao, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye, everybody.